Let's kick things off with a subject everyone is really into: terms and conditions. Actually, they've probably never been on your mind, but you've definitely seen them. Well, sort of, even if you didn't realize it. You know when you download an app to your phone or computer and you get a pop-up message that asks if you agree to their terms and conditions? It's that. Do you read it? No one reads it. And so we do what everyone does. We select agree and move along. Why? Well, they can be crazy long. Instagram's terms, for example, are 5,000 words long. Fortunately, one lawyer decided to read through Instagram's list and spell out their terms in plain English for those of us who aren't lawyers. Here are a few of the highlights. Other people might pay us to use your pictures, but we won't actually pay you. Or we may randomly delete your post. Or we can force you to give up your username for any reason. And finally, we may share your personal information with other companies. So, to sum it up, Instagram sounds like a total creeper. But here's the kicker. All of these terms, they're not set in stone. The terms are subject to change. In other words, here are the rules, here's how we do things. Got all that? Okay, great. By the way, this may all change tomorrow. And that's kind of weird, right? Instagram made the rules, but they may have the right to break those rules. They want it both ways. Not cool, Insta. But it's not just the terms and conditions and apps that are subject to change. Life is subject to change. We all have terms and conditions or expectations for what life should look like. And then one day, life completely rearranges things on us. It breaks the rules and does the unexpected. Change can be a good thing or a bad thing. For example, maybe you made the team this tryout, but you're not a starter. Okay, you'll take that life change. But shortly after making the team, you got injured. Not a great life change. Or maybe you just found out you're moving and you're pumped because you didn't have many friends at your old school and you're ready to hit the reset button. On the other hand, maybe you found out you're moving and it's the worst news possible. You love your school and your friends there. Or maybe your body went through some changes. Upside, you're taller. Bad news, acne. Maybe you've made one of the best friends you've ever had. Or maybe you lost a really good friend because of a misunderstanding that can't seem to be fixed. Maybe you have an awesome new dating relationship, or maybe you were hit with a breakup that totally blindsided you. Change can be awesome or awful. But either way, I think we all struggle with it for a couple of reasons. First, for some of us, it forces us into the unknown. Moving into a new town or school could be an awesome experience, but we don't know yet. Changes don't arrive with a guaranteed set of terms and conditions. So until we know how things turn out, it can be pretty stressful. For others of us, we lose perspective. Change can be emotional. In fact, if it's a big enough change, it can feel like it's the end of the world. And finally, change can cause us to realize we're not in control. If you think about it, we spend a lot of time and energy trying to control our outcomes. We study to make good grades, we practice our sports, instruments, we take the right electives so we'll get into the right college. We do everything we can to avoid arguments with friends or family. And although we never really have control of our lives, we feel it more deeply when we're in the middle of change. And since all of us are subject to change at some point, we're all subject to realizing that we can't make everything in life fit into a nice, perfect box. And so the question we need to tackle isn't how do we avoid change, because change is happening, whether we're ready for it or not. The real question is, how can we make it through change? Fortunately, the Bible has some things to say about this very question. And what the Bible says can actually comfort and carry us through anything life throws our way. But before we get there, let's do some backstory. Thousands of years ago, God chose a group of people, the Israelites, to be his people. And although God is perfect, the Jewish people obviously couldn't behave perfectly. Despite that, however, God still wanted them to live differently than every other people group in the world. So he gave them a set of laws on how to live great lives while setting themselves apart. It started with 10, but it eventually became 613 laws. Yeah, I get it, that's a lot. They had laws for just about every part of life. What to eat and not eat, what to wear and not wear, how to worship God. Crazy, right? Some of those rules for worship stated that only certain people could enter the inner part of the temple, which was like their church, and only a smaller elite group could actually experience God's presence. So the rules for worship were rigid, to say the least. Fast forward a few centuries to when something revolutionary happened. God entered the world as a real flesh and blood person, Jesus. And he shared the amazing truth that his love wasn't just for the Jewish people, but for the whole world. And then, after being put to death and demonstrating just how great his love was, Jesus came back to life. And when Jesus defeated death, it changed everything. It was the game-changing, history-making moment. But then Jesus left the world. And once life returned to somewhat normal, the Jewish people who had become followers of Jesus were shaken up. Their religion, which they had faithfully practiced every day for generations, went from 613 rules to one relationship? Did God's laws have terms and conditions? Were these rules subject to change? To say they had concerns was an understatement. So, a letter was sent to address them. It's called Hebrews. It was written to Jewish people who had followed Jesus. And while we're not sure who wrote it, the author clearly had a deep understanding of God's plan for his people and mankind. And as the letter is ending and the author is writing in his final thoughts, he makes this statement: "Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you." That may seem like a weird thing to hear now, but it made sense at the time. Being a Jewish Jesus follower back then wasn't easy. One of the changes that came with following Jesus meant you were in danger of losing property and money. You could lose everything. But even with the scary threat of potential change like this, the author reminds Jewish believers of something they already knew to be true because they had heard it all of their lives. God would never abandon or fail them. Basically, the writer is saying, hey, a lot is changing, I get that, but God's character hasn't changed at all. The writer continues. A few verses later, he makes a similar statement that I think could help all of us when we're facing a life that is subject to change. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In other words, even though Jesus had changed the game, Jesus himself had not changed. He was the representation of the same God they had been following since they first encountered him. Sure, the way they lived and worshiped was changing in a major way. Instead of following hundreds of rules, they were now free to simply follow one person, Jesus. So that meant worship, no more rules about who could go where in the temple. Experiencing God, his spirit was now available to everyone. Sacrifices, in one move, Jesus became the singular permanent sacrifice for everyone's sin. No more animals had to die like they did in the old system. To us, those changes seem awesome. But to the Jewish people at the time, they were unsettling. Remember, in the middle of change, you have no clue how things are going to turn out. That's why the writer of Hebrews reminds the Jewish believers that even though a lot is changing, they could trust that Jesus himself does not change. He wasn't some random guy showing up to break their system. He was the same God who was present when the system was created. And that's a big deal because they had history with God. They'd experienced ups and downs with him. They had experienced God's faithfulness through tough times in their past. And the same God they or their ancestors had trusted in the past was the same God they could trust now. Their circumstances had changed, but God's character hadn't changed one bit. They hopefully learned something huge, something that applies to you and I today. Life changes, God doesn't. Just think about how freeing that is. Because while everything around you is subject to change and it makes you feel out of control, you can walk with the one who is actually in control. Jesus is a friend who never changes. He was good thousands of years ago, and he's still good today. Your circumstances will change, but his character never will. And the best way to remember this truth is to keep it in front of you. Here's what I mean. If any of you have ever done ballet, you'll be familiar with this concept. Dancers obviously move and spin a lot, but they have a trick that helps them stay stable and balanced. They find a section of the wall they're facing, and as they're dancing, they keep looking at that spot. Otherwise, they'll get dizzy and disoriented. This focus keeps them balanced in the right direction. The same is true of an ice skater when they do crazy spins that give you motion sickness just by watching. They keep their eyes on a single spot. So even though it looks out of control, they remain stable. The same idea holds true for us. Life moves fast and things can change quickly, which makes it incredibly easy for us to feel out of control. And when that happens and we focus on our problems, things feel worse. We tend to forget how God has shown up in the past, and as a result, we lose perspective. It's important that, instead, we stay focused on the one who can stabilize and keep us balanced. So how do we do that? If you think back, I bet you can remember a specific time when God came through for you. Maybe it was when your family didn't have enough money and you prayed for help to get through it. Maybe he was there when a dating relationship ended and he helped you survive. Maybe he's helped you calm your anxiety from time to time. Maybe he answered a really important prayer. Take some time to think through your past and come up with a few specific memories of how God stayed the same when life didn't. Once you remember that moment or time when he showed up, write it down and then keep it in front of you. Doing this reminds you that God has shown up in the past, and it will encourage you to know that he's still the same today. Write it down, then put the note in a place where you'll see it daily. Your bathroom mirror, inside your locker, on the dash of your car, in your notes app on your phone. It may feel lame, but seeing these reminders every day will help you keep things clear when life feels like it's spinning out of control. Listen, change is going to happen. Sometimes it'll be good, and sometimes it won't. But even though life is unpredictable, we can always trust in the one who is predictable. Life changes, God doesn't. He's the same loving God that he's always been. Think of some areas in your life where you can begin to lean on this reality. Maybe it's at home or at school or in a relationship. Because you can't avoid change, but you can make it through change. Because even though life changes, God doesn't.